wrapping this up, documentary confirmation of the Old Testament accounts relative to corroborating its historicity. Of course, the other point is corroborating its accuracy and reliability in what it teaches. That's a whole other subject, but at least you know that there's a tremendous amount of information, archaeologically speaking, that the facts that can be shown to be accurate from archaeology are proved out, and nothing, not one single iota of an archaeological discovery disproves the Bible in any way, shape, way, or form. Now we look at the content. Most importantly, you can discover the reliability of something, not just archaeologically, but far greater by context, by content. You read its content within its context and apply logic, language, context, and logical rules to interpret it properly. Now you can compare. Now you can verify whether it's reliable. If you haven't discovered whether it's reliable by what it says, and in terms of historical evidence, places, and things, people, and then you turn around and look at its content and discover what it's saying via interpretation of language, context, and logic, then you see if it's consistent. Are there any inconsistencies in your interpretations on the same point from one point to another? Now you're getting closer to the truth. You really have to marry yourself to this book if you want to find out if it's reliable, just like you'd have to marry yourself to any book on any subject to find out if it's reliable. An instruction manual on how to repair your automobile. You have to read it and test it out. Is it for the make and the model of your car? If it isn't, it's not reliable for your car, right? Simple logic. Takes a little more time with more facts and figures to prove out in the Bible than it does your automobile maintenance manual, but maybe not much more. So documentary confirmation of the Old Testament accounts relative to corroborating its historicity. Not only do we have accurate copies of the Old Testament, we already went through thousands, tens of thousands of documents that can be shown by careful comparison that we have transmitted down through the centuries the precise words of a reliable translation that we have in our hands now in modern 21st century English. But so not only do we have accurate copies of the Old Testament, but the contents, the manuscripts, are historically reliable. William F. Albright, known for his reputation as one of the greatest archaeologists, states, "There can be no doubt that archaeology has confirmed the substantial historicity of the Old Testament tradition." Professor H. Rowley cited in Donald F. Wiseman, Revelation in the Bible, claims that it is not because scholars of today begin with more conservative presuppositions than their predecessors that they have a much greater respect for patriarchal stories that it was formerly common, but because the evidence warrants it. So you can pick up the book and decide for yourself. Lots of tools that we have, and other people have done a lot of homework for us. It would take many lifetimes for me to get the evidence that I do on my own from scratch. Merrill Unger summarizes the Old Testament archaeology as rediscovered whole nations, resurrected important peoples, and in most astonishing manner filled in historical gaps, adding immeasurably to the knowledge of biblical backgrounds. Whether or not what was written is true, first, is there any defect in there because maybe it's all made up? A lot of people say, men wrote the Bible, it's all made up. Well, that's true, men wrote the Bible, but look at the contents. Is the content reliable? And is it archaeologically, historically accurate? All these fictitious peoples we find actually did exist. You have one civilization or city built over on top of another. You dig down to build new buildings, and wow, there's that civilization underneath. New discoveries continue to confirm the historical accuracy of the literary antiquity of detail after detail in it, the Pentateuch. It is accordingly sheer hypercriticism to deny the substantially Mosaic character of the Pentateuchal tradition. Sir Frederick Kenyon says, "It is therefore legitimate to say that in respect of that part of the Old Testament against which the disintegrating criticism of the last half of the 19th century was chiefly directed, the evidence of archaeology has been to re-establish its authority and likewise to augment its value by rendering it more intelligible through a fuller knowledge of its background and setting. Archaeology has not yet said its last word, but the results already achieved confirm what faith would suggest, that the Bible can do nothing but gain from an increase of knowledge. And this has to say, once we have a very reliable book in your hands in 21st century modern English, if that's your language, you have to still decide to read it in the order it was written, in accordance with the normative rules of language, context, and logic. Otherwise, all is for naught. You can put a Bible in a nice little cabinet with a glass door on it and say, this is one of the most remarkable books in the world, but have you bothered to read it? Why would you say that? And it's remarkable relative to what? Maybe it's still not valuable because it contradicts itself all the time. There are a lot of ancient books, not quite substantiated by any means as the Bible, but they don't have value as to the content. I don't believe in any of the Roman gods or the Greek gods. Some of the philosophies are reasonable, but the biblical philosophy of the same kind is far more accurate and of worth. Archaeology has also given us evidence as to the substantial accuracy of our Masoretic text. The Jeremiah seal has a seal used to stamp the bitumen seals of wine jars and dated from the 1st or 2nd century A.D. Has Jeremiah 48:11 stamped on it, and in general conforms to the Masoretic text. This seal tested the accuracy with which the text was transmitted between the time when the seal was made and the time when the manuscripts were written. Furthermore, the Roberts Papyrus, which dates to the 2nd century B.C., and the Nash Papyrus, dated by Albright before 100 B.C., confirm our Masoretic text. Archaeologist Albright writes concerning the accuracy of the scriptures as a result of archaeology. New discoveries continue to confirm the historical accuracy or the literary antiquity of detail after detail in it, the Pentateuch. Albright comments as follows on what the critics used to say. Until recently, it was the fashion among biblical historians to treat the patriarchal sagas of Genesis as though they were artificial creations of Israelite scribes of the divided monarchy, or tales by imaginative rhapsodists about Israelite campfires during the centuries following their occupation of the country. Eminent names among scholars can be cited for regarding every item of Genesis 11 through 50 as reflecting late invention, or at least retrojection of events and conditions under the monarchy and to the remote past, about which nothing was thought to have been really known to the writers of the later days. What is absent here from any of the works is evidence. Either way, you can make up your own story about what you think happened, but if you have no evidence to support it, you're just a blowing in the wind. Now it has all been changed, says Albright. Archaeological discoveries since 1925 have changed all of this. Aside from a few diehards among older scholars, there is scarcely a single biblical historian who has not been impressed by the rapid accumulation of data supported by the substantial historicity of patriarchal tradition, archaeological finds. According to the traditions of Genesis, the ancestors of Israel were closely related to the semi-nomadic peoples of Transjordan, Syria, and Euphrates Basin, and North Arabia in the last centuries of the 2nd millennium B.C. and the first centuries of the 1st millennium. Millar Burrows continues, to see the situation clearly, we must distinguish two kinds of confirmation, general and specific. General confirmation is a matter of compatibility without the definite corroboration of particular points. Much of what has already been discussed as explanation and illustration may be regarded also as general confirmation. The picture fits the frame. The melody and the accompaniment are harmonious. The force of such evidence is cumulative. The more we find that items in the picture of the past presented by the Bible, even though not directly attested, are compatible with what we know from archaeology, the stronger is our impression of general authenticity. Mere legend or fiction would inevitably betray itself by anachronisms and incongruities. The most widely attested research book of forever, And all it does is corroborate and not denigrate. The University of Chicago Professor Raymond A. Bowman denotes that archaeology helps provide a balance between the Bible and critical hypothesis. The confirmation of the biblical narrative at most points has led to a new respect for biblical tradition and a more conservative conception of biblical history. Albright, in Archaeology Confronts Biblical Criticism, says that archaeological and inscriptural data has established the historicity of innumerable passages and statements of the Old Testament. All archaeology can do is confirm the basic historicity or authenticity of a narrative. It can show that a certain incident fits into the time it purports to be from. Writes G.E. Wright, what we can prove is that Abram's life and times, as reflected in the stories about him, fit perfectly within the early second millennium, but imperfectly within any later period. So the archaeologists, a lot of times, and skeptics will say, well, Abraham couldn't have existed during that period. Well, he didn't. Miller Burroughs of Yale recognized the value of archaeology in confirming the authenticity of the Scriptures. The Bible is supported by archaeological evidence again and again. On the whole, there can be no question that the results of excavation have increased the respect of scholars for the Bible as a collection of historical documents. The confirmation is both general and specific. The fact that the record can be so often explained or illustrated by archaeological data shows that it fits into the framework of history as only a genuine product of ancient life could do. In addition to this general authentication, however, we find the record verified repeatedly at specific points. Names of places and persons turn up at the right place and in the right periods. Joseph Free comments that he once thumbed through the book of Genesis and mentally noted that each of the 50 chapters are either illuminated or confirmed by some archaeological discovery. The same would be true for most of the remaining chapters of the Bible, both Old and New Testaments. Let's take a look at some of the things. The creation. Oh boy, how many skeptics are on this one? The opening chapters of Genesis 1 to 11 are typically thought to be mythological explanations derived from earlier versions of the story found in the ancient Near East. But this view chooses only to notice the similarities between Genesis and the creation stories in other ancient cultures. If we can propose the derivation of the human race from one family, leaves general revelation, some lingering traces of the true historical account would be expected. The differences are more important. Babylonian and Sumerian accounts describe the creation as the product of a conflict among finite gods. When one god is defeated and split in half, the river Euphrates flows from one eye and the Tigris from the other. Humanity is made of the blood of an evil god mixed with clay. These tales display the kind of distortion and embellishment to be expected when an historical account becomes mythologized. Less likely is that the literary progression would be from this mythology to the unadorned elegance of Genesis 1. The common assumption that the Hebrew account is simply a purged and simplified version of the Babylonian legend is fallacious. In the ancient Near East, the rule is that simple accounts of traditions give rise by accretion and embellishment to elaborate legends, but not the reverse. So the evidence supports the view that Genesis was not myth made into history. Rather, the extra-biblical accounts were history made into myths. We have Tel Marduk, the discovery of Elba. Elba tablets, 17,000 tablets from Tel Marduk, northern Syria, dated from 2300 BC, shows us that 1,000 years before Moses, laws, customs, and events were recorded in writing in that part of the world, and that the judicial proceedings and case laws were very similar to the Deuteronomy law code. Deuteronomy 22-22-30 codes are on punishment for sexual offenses. One tablet mentions and lists the 5 cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar in the exact sequence which we find in Genesis 14:8. More on this next time.